In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Please note the explicit content indicator. This means that I use adult language. I do not speak in a humorless, public radio hushed monotone. I am excited and enthusiastic about the information that I present and the topics I discuss. You will hear ice rattle in my glass throughout the show. On the show, I joke about bodily functions, sex acts, religion, and politics. The topics may seem random or scattered through the back catalog. A list of show topics in chronological order is provided on the featured topic link at Advertise.com. If any of these issues might trigger you, this might not be the podcast for you, and I wish you good luck finding a show more to your liking. It's that time again. The music is low. The party is over. The fire is dying down, and all the ordinary people passed out long ago. Now we are the only ones left. All right, welcome. I'm John. We are continuing on our little series here on Book 4, or Liber 4, also just simply titled Magick with a K. It was written by Aleister Crowley and Mary Desty and Leela Waddell. So we're still in the first section called Mysticism. We're going to jump in here on chapter 5. This chapter called Dharana. Before we do that, though, I need to quickly say, if you guys are, I know there are a few of you out there that are doing the fast with me on the 27th. So we did 2 24-hour fasts last week. This week, we're going to do a 48-hour fast. It's going to start at 8 p.m. on the 22nd, and we're going to break it at 8 p.m. on the 24th. Now, with the 48-hour fast, you have to start kind of paying attention to how you break it, because it's a pretty, it's a gap a size. So go ahead and research a little bit about how to break it. Like, you can't just break a 48-hour fast with, eating a Reuben or something. You're going to fuck yourself up royally. Trust me if you do. So go ahead and research how to break that fast. If you have any questions, reach out to me. I'll tell you how I do it. I'm not a subject matter expert, but I will tell you how I do it. And one last thing, let's see. Raise your glass, summon your vessel of the art, and raise your glass to my Patreon and Subscribe Star supporters. Actually, you know what? They're not my Patreon and Subscribe Star supporters. They're our Patreon and Subscribe Star supporters. This podcast belongs to each and every one of us. So I would like to say thank you to our Patreon and Subscribe Star supporters, and to the kisses we've snatched and vice versa listeners. Here's you. Thank you very much. All right, fun stuff tonight. We're going to be talking about invisibility. I can't wait. Chapter 5, Dharana. Now that we have learned to observe the mind so that we know how it works to some extent, and have begun to understand the elements of control, we may try the result of gathering together all the powers of the mind and attempting to focus them on a single point. We know that it is fairly easy for ordinary educated mind to think without much distraction on a subject in which it is much interested. We have the popular phrase, revolving a thing around in our mind. And as long as the subject is sufficiently complex and as long as thoughts pass freely, there is no great difficulty. So long as a gyroscope is in motion, it remains motionless relatively to its support and even resists attempts to distract it. When it stops, it falls from the position. If the earth ceased to spin around the sun, it would at once fall into the earth. So this is a way, I believe, that he's doing the as above, so below, the macrocosm, microcosm. You know, in this case, this fucking solar system and the earth, and on the other spectrum, you know, how you manage your mind and your mindfulness, your single-minded focus. That moment when a student takes a simple subject, or rather a simple object, and imagines it or visualizes it, he will find that it is not so much his creature as he supposed. The other thoughts will invade the mind, so the object is altogether forgotten, perhaps for whole minutes at a time. And at other times, the object itself will begin to play all sorts of tricks. Suppose you have chosen a white cross. It will move its bar up and down. It will elongate the bar. It'll turn the bar oblique, get its arms unequal, turn upside down, grow branches. It gets cracks around it. Figure upon it. Change its shape altogether like an amoeba, change its size and its distance as a whole, change the degree of its illumination, and at the same time change its color. It will get splotchy and blotchy, it'll grow patterns, it'll rise, fall, twist, and turn. Clouds will pass over its face, and there is no conceivable change of which is incapable. Not to mention its total disappearance and replacement by something altogether. Anyone who this experience does not occur need not imagine that he is meditating. It shows merely that he is incapable of concentrating his mind in a very small degree. Perhaps a student may go for several days before discovering that he is actually not meditating. When he does, the obstinacy of the object will infuriate him. And it is only now that his real troubles begin. Only now that will comes really into play. Only now that his manhood is tested. If it were not for this will development, which he got in conquest of Asana, he would probably give up. As it is the mere physical agony which he underwent to the veriest trifle compare with the horrible tedium of Dharana. For the first week, it may seem rather amusing, and you may even imagine that you are progressing, but as the practice teaches you what you are doing, you will apparently get worse and worse. So I'm learning, but I'm no good at meditation. I was trying to meditate the other night, and like my mind just rambles. So like I'm actually not laying there. I'm using one of the positions that we talked about last episode, I think. Not last episode, but the last Liber 4 episode. So I'm working in this, and like I'm sitting there and I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to meditate, and I'm like, all of a sudden, flickering across my subconscious, I start thinking of Batman. And I'm like, okay, there's Batman. So I do like what he's going to tell us to do here in a little bit, where I'm like, okay, I try to keep track of the breaks and concentration. So I'm like, okay, Batman. And then I'm like, I could really use, a cup of soup. I know Batman's favorite soup. And I do know Batman's favorite soup, and this is canon. Do you guys know what Batman's favorite soup is? Bruce Wayne loves mulligatawny soup. Don't ask me how I know that. I just know it. and it's fucking canon. It might even say it on the Wikipedia page. I don't know. I know so much about Batman. I don't need to go to the Wikipedia page. So anyhow, then I'm like Mulligatawny soup, and then I'm like, oh, so what you? So it goes from Batman to Mulligatawny soup to Beastie Boys lyrics. I have no idea why. Batman, Mulligatawny soup, hey ladies, and then I start thinking like Star Wars trivia. I'm like, hey, if in The Force Awakens, Finn can't fly he can't fly a ship, and then he gets put in a coma that lasts all the way to The Last Jedi, and then in The Last Jedi he can fly a ship. Like, how the fuck does that work? Batman to Mulligatawny soup, Beastie Boys lyrics to pointing out plot holes in the shitty Disney Star Wars movies. And it just keeps going. Like, it just keeps going. Please understand that in doing this practice, you are supposed to be seated in asana. And to have a notebook and a pencil by your side and a watch in front of you. And you are not to practice at first for more than 10 minutes at a time, so as to avoid a risk of overtiring the brain. In fact, you will probably find that the whole of your willpower is not equal to keeping to a subject at all for as long as 3 minutes. Or even Batman, Mulligatawny soup. Hey, ladies, how can Finn fly a fucking jet or a fucking spaceship? Or even, and I know he can't fly in The Force Awakens. It's the whole plot point. It's why he saves Poe Dameron, because he needs a pilot, because he can't fly a fucking spaceship. Anyhow. Or even apparently concentrating on it for as long as 3 seconds or 3/5 of 1 second by keeping to it at all is meant the mere attempt to keep to it. The mind becomes so fatigued and the object so incredibly loathsome that it is useless to continue for the time being. In Freighter P's record, Freighter P is, I believe, a pen name of Crowley's. So he's referring to himself here in the third person with an alias. In Freighter P's record, we find that after daily practice for 6 months, meditations of 4 minutes and less are still being recorded. So maybe I'm not doing as bad a job as I think that I'm doing. The student is supposed to count the number of times that his thought wanders, and he can do this on his fingers or on a string of beads. Batman, Mulligatawny soup, hey ladies, shitty Star Wars movies. There's a footnote here from the editor. I kept it in because I felt it was pertinent. Counting these easily become quite mechanical, with a thought that reminds you of a break associate with the notion of counting. The grosser kind of break can be detected by another person. It is accompanied with a flickering of the eyelid and can be seen by him. With practice, he could detect even very small breaks. So how as unnerving as it does sound, you know, as hard as it is to meditate, to think that some guy is sitting there with you, staring at your eyelids while you're trying to meditate. It's like, this is why it seems like a lot of pressure. It's very awkward. This is why I have never done a threesome, because I'm nervous enough with just one other person in the room. You know what I mean? Not that I haven't had an opportunity. I mean, remember, I went to art school. If these breaks seem to become more frequent instead of less frequent, the student must not be discouraged. This is partially caused by an increased accuracy of observation. In exactly the same way the introduction of vaccinations resulted in an apparent increase in the numbers of cases of the smallpox. The reason being that people began to tell the truth about the disease instead of faking it. Soon, however, the control will improve faster than the observation. When this occurs, the improvement will become apparent in the record. Any variation will probably be due to the accidental circumstances. For example, one night you may be very tired when you start. Another night you may have a headache or indigestion. You will do well to avoid practicing at such times. We will suppose then that you have reached a stage when your average practice on one subject is about a half an hour, and the average number of breaks between 10 and 20. One would suppose that this implied that during these periods between the breaks, one was really concentrated, but this is not the case. The mind is flickering, although imperceptibly. However, there may be sufficient real steadiness, even at this early stage, to cause some very striking phenomenon, of which is most marked in one which will probably make you think that you have gone to sleep, or it may seem inexplicable, and in any case will disgust you with yourself. You will completely forget who you are and what you are doing. A similar phenomenon sometimes happens when when one is half awake in the morning and one cannot think of what town one is living in. The similarity of these two things is rather significant, and I suggest what is really happening is that you are waking up from the sleep which men call waking, the sleep whose dreams are life. There is another way to test one. It's like you're waking up from the Matrix. Or you're waking up to the idea that you're plugged into the Matrix, maybe. There is another way to test one's progress in this practice, and that is by the character of the breaks. Okay, here we go. Breaks are classified as follows. Firstly, the physical sensation, and these should have been overcome by asana. So the physical sensation, I believe, would be like, so when you're in the army or whatever, and you're at the position of attention, as soon as you get into the position of, they're like their preparatory command, like squad, and then their command, attention, shoot. Like you snap to the position of attention. The second that happens, your nose starts itching. Or your scalp starts itching, or something is wildly starts bothering you, but you can't break attention. Every person knows that. If you've ever been to like a change of command ceremony or a pass and review, everybody has done this. No matter what, you get put in the position of attention, your fucking nose starts itching. Or like if you're if you're Barack Obama, a fucking fly crawls across your face or something like that. Secondly, breaks that seem to be dictated by events immediately preceding the meditation. Their activity becomes tremendous. Only by this practice does one understand how much is really observed by the senses without the mind becoming conscious of it. That one's interesting to me. It's like your narrowing of focus. Like when you get scared or startled, like the tunnel vision that helps you in your fight or flight. Thirdly, there's a class of breaks partaking to the nature of reverie or daydreams. Batman, mulligatawny soup. Hey ladies, what's up with Finn being able to fly a spaceship all of a sudden? There are very insidious. One may go on for a long time without realizing that one has wandered at all. Fourthly, we get a very high class of break, which is a sort of aberration of the control itself. You think, how well am I doing? Or perhaps what it would be rather a good idea if I were on a desert island, or if you were in a soundproof house, or you were sitting by a waterfall. But those are all trifling variations from the vigilance itself. A fifth class of breaks seems to have no discoverable source in the mind. Such may even take the form of actual hallucinations, usually auditory, of course. Such hallucinations are infrequent and are recognized for what they are. Otherwise, the student had better see his doctor. The usual kinds consist of odd sentence fragments of sentences which are heard quite distinctly in a recognizable human voice, but not the student's own voice or that of anyone he knows. A similar phenomenon is observed by wireless operators who call such messages atmospherics. That's radio signals that bounce off the atmosphere. There's a further kind of break, which is a desired result itself. It must be dealt with later in detail. Okay, well, we'll put a pin in that. Now there's real sequence in the classes of breaks as control improves. The percentage of primaries and secondaries will diminish, even though the total number of breaks in a meditation remains stationary. By the time that you are meditating 2 or 3 hours a day, who has time to do this? And filling up most of the rest of the day with other practices designed to assist when nearly every time something or another happens, and there is constantly a feeling being on the brink of something pretty big, one may expect to proceed to the next state, which is Dhyana. This is chapter 6. I got to take a little break here. So what is Dhyana? This word has 2 quite distinct and mutually exclusive meanings. The first refers to the result itself. Dhyana is the same word as Pali Jhana. The Buddha counted 8 jhanas, which are evidently different degrees and kinds of trances. The Hindu also speaks of the Dhyana as a lesser form of the Samadhi, which we will talk about in great length later. However, probably next episode we do of Liber 4. Others, however, treat it as if it were merely an intensification of Dharana. Patanjali says, Dharana is holding the mind onto some particular object. An unbroken flow of knowledge the subject is Dhyana. When that giving up all form reflects only the meaning, it is Samadhi. He combines the 3 into Samayama. We shall treat Dhyana as a result rather than as a method. Up to this point, ancient authorities have been fairly reliable guides, except with regard to their crabbed ethics. Crowley is hilarious when he wants to be. I'm sorry. That is just funny. But when they get on the subject of results of meditation, they completely lose their heads. They exhaust the possibilities of poetry to declare what is demonstrably untrue. For example, we find in the Shiva Sanhita that he who daily contemplates on the lotus of his heart is eagerly desired by the daughters of gods. He has clairaudience, clairvoyance, and he can walk in the air. Another person can make gold, discover medicine for disease, and see hidden treasures. All this is filth. What is the curse upon religion that its tenets must always be associated with every kind of extravagance and falsehood? So we're going to move into this section here where he starts talking about AA, but it's not like the Friends of Bill W. AA. It's the AA here is the Astrum Argentum. And it's this spiritual organization Crowley funded in they teach scientific illuminism, which we're going to get into a little bit through a series of degrees and initiations. So here we go. There is one exception. It is the AA. The Ostrum Argenteum, whose members are extremely careful to make no statement at all that cannot be verified in the usual manner, or where it is not easy, at least avoid anything like a dogmatic statement. In their second book of practical instruction, which is called Liber 0, occur these words. By doing certain things, certain results will follow. Students are most earnestly warned against attributing objective reality or philosophical validity to any of them. Wow. Fuck. I think I should read that again, right? Not because I don't trust you guys to retain, but I just wouldn't want to read it again. I want to soak it back in. By doing certain things, results will follow. Students are most earnestly warned against attributing objective reality or philosophical validity to any of them. Those golden words. In discussing Dhyana, let it be clearly understood that something unexpected is about to be described. We shall consider its nature and estimate its value in a perfectly unbiased way, without allowing ourselves the usual rhapsodies or deducing any theory of the universe. One extra fact may destroy some existing theory that is common enough, but no single fact is sufficient to construct one. It will have been understood that Dharana and Dhyana and Samadhi form a continuous process, and exactly when the climax comes does not matter. I disagree. Oh, no, wait. Okay. I don't think we're talking about the same climax. It is of this climax that we must speak, for this is a matter of experience and a very striking one. In the course of our concentration, we notice that the contents of the mind at any moment consists of two things and no more: object variable and the subject invariable, or apparently so. By success in Dharana, the object has been made as invariable as the subject. Now, the results of this, that the two become one. Here we go. This is another magical thing. The two become one. Breathe in, union, alchemy, the uniting of male and feminine. This phenomenon usually comes as a tremendous shock. It is indescribable even by the masters of the language, and it is therefore not surprising the semi-educated stutterers wallow in the oceans of gush. All the poetic faculties and all the emotional faculties are thrown into a sort of ecstasy by an occurrence which overthrows the mind and makes the rest of life seem absolutely worthless in comparison. Good literature is principally a matter of clear observation and a good judgment expressed in the simplest way. For this reason, none of the great events of history, such as earthquakes and great battles, have been well described by eyewitnesses, unless those eyewitnesses were out of danger. But even when one has become accustomed to Dhyana, by constant repetition, no words seem adequate. One of the simplest forms of Dhyana may be called the sun. The sun is seen, as it were, by itself, not by an observer. And although the physical eye cannot behold the sun, one is compelled to make the statement that this sun is far more brilliant than the sun of nature. The whole thing takes place on a higher level. Also, the conditions of thought, time, and space are abolished. It's impossible to explain what this really means. Only experience can furnish you with apprehension. A further development is the appearance of the form which has been universally described as human, although not the persons describing it proceed to add a great number of detail which are not human at all. This particular appearance is usually assumed to be a god. Here we go. This is good. But whatever it may be, the result on the mind of the student is tremendous. All his thoughts are pushed to their greatest development. He sincerely believes that they have the divine sanction. Perhaps even supposes that they emanate from this God. And he goes back into the world armed with this intense conviction and authority. He proclaims his idea without the restraint which is imposed on most persons by doubt, modesty, and indifference. So those of you that are going to listen to next week's episode, we begin on a totally new topic, and I don't want to blow it because it's going to be great. But I want you guys to remember that. After he experiences God, he goes back to the world armed with the intense conviction and authority. And he proclaims his idea without the restraint which is imposed upon most people by doubt, modesty, and difference. While further there is, one may suppose, a real clarification. In any case, the mass of mankind is always ready to be swayed by anything thus authoritative and distant. History is full of stories of officers who have walked unarmed up to the mutinous regiment and disarmed them by a mere force of confidence. The force of the orator over the mob is well known. It is probably for this reason that the prophet had been able to constrain mankind to obey his law. Oh, hey, I found a typo in this book. It never occurs to him that anyone can do otherwise in practical life. One can walk past any guardian, such as a sentry or a ticket collector, if one can really act so that the man somehow persuaded that you have the right to pass unchallenged.
Are you a pagan and or witch, business owner, author, artist, musician, or content creator wanting to get your name out there? Then Flatline to Beatline is a podcast created especially for you. It is a interview-style business podcast with an edge. You can reach me on Twitter at F2B Podcast and allow Flatline to Beatline help you break through the noise.
So this month on the Fulgar Correspondentia, just a fancy word for the mailing list. Since we're heading into the fourth quarter of our Genesis series, there's a little brief Genesis timeline, according to me, that's up there. Also, since we are going to be getting into Jacob and Esau, I finally sat down and started to work on a map of the wrong son, the wrong blessing idea that we've been running into pretty much this whole Genesis thing. Sat down and worked out some pretty cool details, so I think it's pretty cool. Also, as always, you can look at my latest up-to-date version of the tarot cards that I'm designing. All that if you just sign into the mailing list, all that bonus stuff. But the Fellowcraft episode on the Patreon and Subscribe Star this month, we're starting to look at and dissect the work of Milton William Cooper in an episode entitled The UFO Conspiracy Part 1.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that, plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
Those tarot cards that I was talking about in the break, they're fucking legit, dudes. They're fucking legit. If you don't want to sign into the mailing list, but you want to take a look at them, I'm previewing some of them on my Instagram. They're great. It's taken me quite a few months. I did the minor arcana first and then the major arcana. And then I'm doing something that I haven't seen anybody do. I'm doing a third arcana. Mine is called the Vulgar Arcana, and there's wild mechanics to it. You can use them with the traditional deck if you wanted. Like, you can use them with the minor and the major arcana if you wanted, or you can use them separately as like a set of oracle cards. I think by the time this comes out, I might have some preview images up on the Fulgor Correspondentia. So what happens, you sign into the mailing list, and you receive a message back with a link to a secret part of the website. You get on there, you get all the bonus content, including this the tarot card dump. And there's also text versions of all the tarot card episodes that I've done, which literally is like a fucking dictionary level study of these tarot cards. Anyhow, back to it. We're going to be talking about invisibility, which is great. I've been racking my brain trying to figure out if I've ever been invisible. And I, maybe I'll tell you about the time that I was invisible. Back to it. Let's see. This power, by the way, is what has been described by magicians as the power of invisibility. Someone or other who has an excellent story, or for quite reliable men who were on the lookout for a murderer. He had been instructed to let no one pass, and who all swore subsequently in the presence of the dead body that no one had passed. None of them had seen the postman. The thieves who stole the Gioconda from the Louvre were probably disguised as workmen and stole the picture under the very eye of the guardian. Very likely they got him to help them. It is only necessary to believe that the thing must bring it about. This belief must not be an emotional or intellectual one. It resides in the deeper portion of the mind. Yet a portion not so deep, but most men, probably all successful men, will understand these words, having experience of their own which they can compare. The most important factor in Dhyana is, however, this is very important, and this has been coming up more and more on the show. I would file this under being humble. The most important factor in Dhyana is, however, the annihilation of the ego. Our concept of the universe must be completely overturned if we were to admit this as valid. But it is time that we consider what is really happening. So I'm going to stop here for 1 second. I'm going to, I don't think this is invisibility the way that Crowley's talking about this invisibility of confidence. But I was invisible once. So what had happened is we were in Yakima, Washington, and so I was in the Army, and I was with I was a combat engineer. So we were out there, and what happens when you go on these maneuvers or war games or whatever is you have an Op 4, which is the opposition force. So you actually have boots on the ground working against you. And then you are, you're, the regular old whatever. So we got some juicy intelligence where this platoon of M1 tanks were, and it was it had gotten to be nighttime, and we were like camped out, whatever. We were in our little perimeter, so there were 5 of our 8 armor personnel carriers. There was a lieutenant in the center, and then each squad took one of the points around. And what would happen is you would go into a sleep schedule. So for each track, say there's like 5 or 6 or maybe 7 or 8 dudes in each track or armor personnel carrier. So one person would have to be up at the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun, and you got your little night vision goggles or whatever. So we were doing that, and then so we got this juicy intelligence where this platoon of M1s were. And we had this real high-speed squad leader. I believe he was the squad leader of the 3rd squad. He was like super dope, high-speed guy. He actually stayed in. He actually transitioned to be an officer. I think he's a captain of something now. But so he gets this idea. He's like, we're going to go and attack these tanks. And people were like, what are you talking about? Like, you just don't do this, right? But he's like, no, we're going to take out a platoon of these tanks. I probably should. What if ISIS is listening to this? Maybe I shouldn't tell this story. Anyhow, so he goes, he gets into, where the commo equipment is in his track, and he pulls out a box of 9-volt, just regular old 9-volt batteries. And so he starts talking to us about this drill where, so like when we pulled guard duty, we would be outside, like our little heads would be like sticking out from behind the machine guns, and we would have, night vision goggles. Well, tankers don't do that. What tankers do is they stay buttoned up and they scan with their thermals. So they're not scanning with night vision. All night vision does is take the ambient light that's in the sky and amplifies it. And this is not infrared, or I guess it could be infrared, but thermals is where it's actually tracking heat. So he's like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to stay out of the sight line because it still works on point A, the thermal, to point B, your body heat. So we're going to stay out of line, we're going to stay out of the sight line of this thermal camera. So they stay buttoned up and they just scan. So there's 4 of them or 5 of them. I think there was just 4 of them. I think they were just the points. I don't think that their main dude was in the middle. I could be wrong about that. I'm not sure. And we're going to plug these batteries into each other. So plus to minus. And what happens is your normal 9-volt battery will start to heat up if you do that. It creates like a circuit, right? So we start throwing these batteries out. And when we seen these tanks, they were like scanning to figure out what this heat signature is that they're picking up. When they would move, we could tell when we were not physically in their line of sight anymore. And so we packed up satchel charges, which are, it's basically like a European carry-on. It's like your man purse, except it's packed full of C4 with a M2 fuse igniter sticking out of it. And it's all timed out and whatever. So when we left all of our bullshit. Like we took a couple magazines of rounds, our weapons, and, we left all the helmets and stuff off. So we were like super fucking stealth mode. The only person making noise was, so when you're doing these war games, you have to have like a referee. So this fucking referee had to have all of his bullshit and he's battle rattling behind us and we're being all like fucking ninjas. So anyhow, we see these tanks starting to scan for these red hot batteries. And as soon as they turn their turret far this way, guy would run up, jump on top of the tank, jam his little thing underneath the turret, pull his, fuse igniter and haul ass. And so we wound up killing a whole platoon of these tanks. Now, in real world, I don't think a satchel charge would do catastrophic damage to one of these M1 tanks. I don't think that they would. I've seen these M1 tanks take a lot of heat, a lot of pounding. But for the sake of the maneuvers, the referee was like, wow, man, that was fucking pretty slick. So there you go. That's the one time I was actually invisible. I feel like I babbled for a long time. I'm sorry. Back to it. John Towers' Tales of Invisibility. It will be back to it. It will be conceded that we have given a very rational explanation of the greatness of great men. They had an experience so overwhelming and so out of proportion to the rest of the things that they were freed from all petty hindrances, which prevent the normal man from carrying out his projects. Worrying about clothes, food, and money, what people may think and how and why, and above all, the fear of consequences, clog nearly everyone. Here. Nothing is easier theoretical than for an anarchist to kill a king. He only has to buy a rifle and make himself a first-class shot. And shoot the king from a quarter mile away. And yet, although there are plenty of anarchists, outrages are very few. At the same time, the police would probably be the first to admit that if there were any man really tried or tired of life in his deepest being, the state of very different from that in which a man goes about saying that he is tired of life, he could manage somehow or another to kill someone first. Now, the man who has experienced any of the more intense forms of Dhyana is thus liberated. The universe is thus destroyed for him. This reminds me of Jack Parsons, right? In, in the Babylon Working, he says, for in his left hand he crushed a universe and naught remains. And for it, his will can therefore go on its way unhampered. One may imagine that in the case of Muhammad, he had cherished for years a tremendous ambition and had never done anything, because those qualities which were subsequently manifested as state-shipped warned him that he was impotent. Ooh, sick burn. His vision in the cave gave him what confidence which was required, the faith that moves mountains. There are a lot of solid-seeming things in this world which a child could push over, but not one has the courage to push. Let us accept provisionally this explanation of greatness and pass it by. Ambition has led to this point, but we are now interested in the work for its own sake. As a most astounding phenomenon has happened to us, we have had an experience which makes love, fame, rank, ambition, wealth look like 30 cents. And we began to wonder passionately, what is the truth? This universe has tumbled about our ears like a house of cards, and we have tumbled too. Yet this ruin is like the opening of the gates of heaven. Here is a tremendous problem, and there is something within us which ravens for its solution. Let's see what explanation we can find. The first suggestion, which would enter a well-balanced mind versed in the study of nature, is that we have experienced a mental catastrophe. Just as a blow on the head, will made a man see stars. So one might suppose that the terrific mental strain of Dharana has somehow overexcited the brain and caused a spasm, or possibly even the breaking of a small vessel. There seems no reason to reject this explanation altogether, although it would be rather absurd to suppose that to accept it would be to condemn the practice. Spasm is a normal function of at least one of the organs of the body. Remember, I told you, man, he's funny if you know how to read him. That the brain is not damaged by the practice is proved by the fact that many people who claim to have had this experience repeatedly continue to exercise the ordinary avocations of life without diminished activity. We may dismiss, then, the psychological question. It throws no light on the main problem, which is the value of the testimony of the experience. Now, this is a very difficult question and raises the much larger question as to the value of any testimony. Every possible thought has been doubted at some time or another, except the thought which can only be expressed by a note of interrogation. Since to doubt, that thought asserts it. But apart from his deep-sealed philosophical doubt, there is the practical doubt of every day. A popular phrase, to doubt the evidence of one's own senses, shows us that the evidence is normally accepted, but a man of science does nothing of the sort. He is so well aware of his senses constantly deceive him that he invents elaborate instruments to collect them. And he is further aware that the universe, which can directly perceive through sense in the minutest fraction of the universe which he knows indirectly. For example, 4/5 of the air is composed of nitrogen. If anyone were to bring a bottle of nitrogen into the room, it would be exceedingly difficult to say what it was. Nearly all the tests that one could apply to it would be negative. His senses tell him little or nothing. Argon was only discovered at all by comparing the weight of the chemically pure nitrogen, that of the nitrogen of the air. This had often been done, but no one had sufficiently fine instruments even to perceive the discrepancy. To take another example, a famous man of science asserted not so long ago that science could never discover the chemical composition of the fixed stars, yet this has been done with certainty. If you were to ask your man of science for his theory of the real, he would tell you that the ether, which cannot be perceived in any way by any of the senses or detected by any instruments, and which possesses the quality which are, to use ordinary language, impossible, is very much more real than the chair he is sitting on. The chair is only one fact, and its existence is testified by the one very fallible person. The ether is the necessary deduction from millions of facts, which have been verified again and again and checked by every possible test of truth. There is therefore no priori reason for rejecting anything on the ground that it is not directly perceived by the senses. And to turn to another point, one of our tests of truth is the vividness of the impression. An isolated event in the past of no great importance may be forgotten, and if it be in some way recalled, one might find oneself asking, did I dream it, or did it really happen? What can never be forgotten is the catastrophic, the first death among the people that one loves, for example, would never be forgotten. And the first time one would realize what one had previously merely known, such as the experience sometimes drives people insane. Men of science have been known to commit suicide when their pet theory has shattered. Global warming. This problem has been discussed freely in science and Buddhism. Time, the camel, and other papers. This much only need we say in this place, that Dhyana has to be classed as the most vivid and catastrophic of all experience. This will be confirmed by anyone who has been there. It is then difficult to overrate the value of such an experience has for the individual, especially as it is his entire conception of things, including his most deep-seated conception, the standard to which he has always referred everything, his own self that is overthrown. And when he to explain it away as a hallucination, a temporary suspension of the faculties, or sometimes similar, we find ourselves unable to do so. You cannot argue with the flash of lightning that has knocked you down. I really like that. Hold on, I gotta make a note of this real quick. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to get through this. I know we're running a little bit long. Any mere theory is easy to upset. One can find flaws in the reasoning process. One can assume that the premises are in some ways false. But in this case, if one attacks the evidence for Dhyana, the mind is staggering by the fact that all other experience attacked on the same lines will fall much more easily. In whatever way we examine it, the result will always be the same. Dhyana may be false, but if so, so is everything else. Now the mind refuses to rest in a belief of the unreality of its own experiences. It may not be what it seems, but it must be something. And if ordinary life is something, how much more must that be by whose light ordinary life seems nothing? The ordinary man sees the falsity and the disconnectedness and the purposelessness of dreams. He ascribes them rightly to a disordered mind. The philosopher looks upon the waking life with a similar contempt. But the person who has experienced Dhyana takes the same view, but not by mere pale intellectual conviction. Reasons, however cogent, never convince utterly. In Dhyana has the same commonplace certainty that man has on waking from a waking. God damn it, waking from a nightmare. I wasn't falling down 1,000 flights of stairs. It was only a bad dream. Similarly comes the reflection of the man who had an experience of Dhyana. I am not that wretched insect, the imperceptible parasite of earth. It was only a bad dream. And as you could not convince the normal man that his nightmare was more real than his awakening, so you cannot convince the other that his Dhyana was a hallucination, even though he is only too well aware that he has fallen from that state into, quote, normal, unquote, life. It sounds depressing that way. It is probably rare for a single experience to upset thus radically the whole conception of the universe, just as sometimes in the first moments of waking there remains a half doubt as to whether a dream or waking is real. I had that the other day. I dreamed that I was in a terrible bank robbery plot and I was just waiting for the fucking cops to pull up to my house. But as one gains further experience, when Dhyana is no longer a shock, when the student has had plenty of time to make himself at home in the new world, this conviction will become absolute. Another rationalist consideration for this, the student has not been trying to excite the mind, but to calm it. Not to produce any one thought, but to exclude all thoughts. For there is no connection between the object of meditation and the Dhyana. Why must we suppose a breaking down of the whole process, especially as the mind bears no subsequent traces of any interference, such as pain or fatigue? Surely this one, if never again the Hindus imagine, expresses the simplest theory. That image is that of a lake onto which 5 glaciers move. The glaciers are the senses, and while the ice is breaking off constantly into the lake, the waters are troubled. If the glaciers are stopped, the surface becomes calm, and then, and only then, can it reflect unbroken the disk of the sun, and this sun is the soul, or God. We should, however, avoid these terms for the present on account of their implications. Let us rather speak of this sun as some unknown thing whose presence had been masked by all things known and by the knower. Wow, I should really take a note of that one too. It is probable too that our memory of Dhyana is not the phenomenon itself, but the image left thereby on the mind. It is true of all phenomenon, as Berkeley and Kant have proved beyond all question. This matter then need not concern us. Here we go. Let's wrap this fucking thing up. We may, however, provisionally accept the view that Dhyana is real, the more real and thus of more importance to ourselves than all experiences. This state has been described not only by the Hindus and Buddhists, but by Mohammedans and Christians in Christian writings. However, the deeply seated dogmatic bias has rendered their documents worthless to the average man. I'm sorry, I gotta make a note of this one. They ignore the essential conditions of Dhyana and insist on the inessential to a much greater extent than the best Indian writers. But to anyone who has experience and some knowledge of comparative religion, the identity is certain. We may now proceed to Samadhi. I'm going to let Hilla tell you what to do next. Thank you guys for listening. I will see you later.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
Hey, did you learn something? Did you laugh? Supporting me is a way for you to be a part of the Advercast and ensure its growth and sustainability. It also means I can create a normal schedule for shows and bonus shows, as well as the exclusive Fellowcraft episodes. By supporting the show, you are not only a listener, but you are a part of the show. You supporting the show gives me a way to offer fun rewards as a thank you for showing your appreciation and support for our projects. Do you have an idea for a reward that you don't see? Let me know. My supporters are my partners. I currently pay for you to listen to the Advercast. Not only do I pay the hosting bills out of my own pocket, I volunteer my time and talent to each and every episode of the Advercast. The price of books, the time and resources of reading and researching, the massive amounts of gin and tonic needed, the equipment it takes to record the shows, the time and resources it takes to create the bonus material, and the cost to maintain the internet presence. Is it worth your support? I don't know. I'm proud of the Advercast, and I feel like I'm improving all the time. In addition to creating the show that you dig and that you are excited about, I also have a full-time commitment and other obligations. So why financial support? All of the supporters help me focus my time on the quality and development of the podcast. And what if you can't afford, $1 or $3 or $10 or whatever a month? Believe me, I get that. There are many degrees of support, but if you can't support the show financially, please consider leaving a 5-star rate and review on your preferred podcast app. And don't forget that you could sign into the mailing list and still unlock a lot of bonus content. Thank you. I cannot put into words how much it means to me that you listen to the show each time I post a new episode. Your feedback, support, and love of the stories that we talk about here is what keeps me going.